Movement is your dog's language. Learning to understand it changes everything. Welcome to Inside the Canine Athlete with Jana and Dr. Sherman Canapp.
Today, we are starting from the ground up, like literally. We are going to talk about the toes or the dog's digits and why these small structures can really matter so much for our canine athletes. And even though we will use the agility dog as our main example today, this topic is really not only for agility dog. Like every canine athlete uses their toes. So whether they're running, they're turning, they're jumping, like braking and accelerating, or simply like living a very active life. So the digits really are a part of how they grip the ground, manage force, and also adapt to the surface. And agility just gives us a really clear example because everything happens so fast. Like we see this acceleration, tight turns, takeoffs and landings and contacts and weaves and all these surface changes. So all in one sport. So I believe it is a perfect way to explain why toes matter. And I think this is such a good place to start because toes are so easy to overlook. They're small, they're close to the ground, and unless a dog is really like obviously lame or there is visible swelling, I have a feeling that many handlers do not immediately think of them as a major performance structure. So, Sherman, before we focus on the agility dog example, can you explain like why digits matter so much for every canine athlete?
Oh my Lord. Oh my Lord. And this is where it all begins. It's a chain. Okay. It's a chain. And where we meet the surface, whether we're talking about dirt, grass, artificial turf, a dock that we're jumping off of, it's all about this. It's all about starting with grip. And so not only do we have to worry about this from a standpoint of performance, we have to worry about this from a standpoint of injury as well. And there's so many little tips that we're going to be giving the listeners here to talk about what to watch for, what to feel for, how to prevent some of these things. Because it's a chain. We may think, oh, there's a shoulder issue, and there may be a shoulder issue, but guess where it started? Down at the toe. And why may that have occurred? Because the dog was running on something that had such incredible grip that it gripped, locked the brakes, and threw off the shoulder. Oh my Lord, who would ever think the shoulder injury could have come from way downstream from the toe? And how long should those nails be? What do the nails even do? And then we have these thumbs. Do they need thumbs? Well, we need our thumbs. They do as well. And so, man, is it going to be an important episode? So whether you're agility, dock diving, herding, IGP, all your dogs use these. And so we need to understand functionally what they do, but we need to understand body mapping. What does it feel like normally? What should you be looking for and feeling for just in a normal situation and after you train or compete, because it can change. So there's a lot to dig into here. Literally dig into.
Literally. Actually, before we talk about injuries or like sport performance, what if we still give people a simple map of what is actually in the toe? Like, Sherman, when we say the digit or the toe, like what structures are we actually talking about? Can you explain like in simple terms?
No, absolutely. And that's the thing I love about, the canine athlete is we're talking about going under the hood, right? So we're going inside the canine. Well, let's go inside the canine athlete when it comes to the toes. We're not just looking, if we look at our own hands, that we have right here, very, very similar. And we look at them and it's as a dog's paw and we say, well, yeah, there's these pads and there's a nail and there's some fur and things move. We don't think of all the structures that are deep down inside and that they all have an actual part to play, whether it's going straight, whether it's turning at speed, whether it's acceleration, deceleration, braking. Your dogs have to go fast no matter what sport they're doing. They have to have acceleration, they have to have braking, they have to turn, they have to land. So there are structures from tendons to ligaments to joint capsule to supporting soft tissue structures that people probably never even heard the name of, to even the nails and how long should those nails be or not be. It's a lot going on under the hood that we don't think about structurally. And we can definitely do a deep dive if you want to share an anatomy picture or slide, boy, can we go under the hood here, so that for those of you that are listening and not watching, let's think about your dog's paw or even like our hand and our fingers. So we have a fingernail, right? And they have nails as well. And those are associated with what we call a phalanx, which is basically one of our digits. And we have 3 digits just like they do. They have what we call P1, 2, and 3. And that third one is associated with that little teeny tiny bone where the nail is. Then we go up to the next one. We actually call these our knuckles in people. This would be our second. And then we have what we would call our first. Okay. And that goes up to where we would think of our hand bones, or we call them metacarpals. And then we have what we would call our wrist or our carpal bones. That's theirs as well. And then we have, in veterinary medicine, we would call the distal antebrachial carpal joint. It's really our wrist is what it comes down to. So those are the things we think about. And then there's we'll label them the actual different toes or digits. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we would basically go with 1 being like our thumbs for those listening. We have 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 is going to be our little finger on the outside. That's going to be important when we talk about anatomy with injury, because if we think about turns, there are certain digits that actually are more at risk for injury than others based on where they are anatomically positioned on the actual foot. Okay, so we think about the bones and that makes sense, but there is so much more than just the bones when it comes to the foot or the paw. Okay, so then we get into these crazy soft tissue structures. And if we go to the next slide, for those of you that are actually watching, boy, is there much more under the hood. So now for each one of these little digits, so let's feel our own finger for those of you, that are listening and not watching, and you move your digit, okay, or you feel where your knuckle is, deep down in there, there's collateral ligaments on the inside and the outside. And if you think about that, you've heard of spraining your ankle, where this would be spraining your digit. Super common. This is one of the most common things that we see clinically in sports medicine, as far as something going on within our digits, is a sprain to one of these collaterals. But oh boy, if there's 3 digits, that means there could be a sprain at any one of those digits. And there's collaterals on the inside and the outside. So it gets really deep under the hood. We have to think about each one of these digits, and we'll talk about what you're going to be feeling for or looking for preventively or prophylactically. Then if you think about it, we have to be able to flex or extend those digits. So think about you're playing the piano. Okay, they're digging into the grass, digging into artificial turf or into the dirt. That's going to be your flexor tendons. And there's various different flexors. There's deep digital and superficial digital, but basically that allows them to grip. Well, if you're playing piano, yes, you're bringing your fingers down, but guess what? You have to also bring your fingers up, and that's going to be what we call the extensors. So it's a pulley mechanism of pulling down to flex, pulling up to extend. That's important because you can strain any of those soft tissues with certain types of activities, repetitive activities, or something that may happen traumatically. But then it gets even further. We talk about going a little bit deeper now. We have the pads. Well, we see the pads under the foot, right? And those pads are extremely important for grip. They're helpful for grip as far as acceleration, very helpful for deceleration. But think of the different surfaces. We're talking about agility a lot, but if we're out there and we're doing search and rescue, if we're doing herding, they're on irregular terrain. There's rocks, there's roots, and those pads actually cushion. But in agility, they act as a cushion or a shock absorber as well. So when those dogs come down from a jump or going over obstacles, basically that cushion to each one of those protects the joint, okay? Because way down in that joint, think about it also, there's cartilage and there's a little water balloon around it. We call it the joint capsule. And each side in each one of those joints is fluid. So down the road, when we talk about joint supplements or things we can do to make those joints healthy, each one of those little digits actually has a joint in there. And we don't even think of things down that far, but there's cartilage in there and joint fluid. And then we work our way up the paw further. We have that really big pad under your dog's, what we call the carpus or the foot. That is a supporting structure. Okay, that's going to bear the majority of the weight, but it's also important as far as sport. And then we don't give a lot of credit to that pad that lives way up the back of the paw, up almost like you're going up around the wrist area for us as a human. And that's the accessory carpal pad. And boy, is that important. If you think about running and you just slam on the brakes, that pad comes into play. If you look at slow motion videos of dogs coming down obstacles like a A-frame, you'll see them actually engage these things many a times. When they come off a jump, they are absolutely engaging. And then we talk about the dew claws as well. If you watch slow motion video, if you look at these dogs turning, they are gripping. They're actually using those digits. Okay. So if you want to walk us through this video, this is a beautiful example.
Absolutely. I mean, I pulled together some some footage that we have, and definitely you can appreciate how much the digits are involved. Like if you look at an image of the dog performing catheter or a weaves, you can see how active they are. So they have to extend, they have to grip, they have to, let's play this again. So even if they're going over the contacts, you see how much they are gripping to get that propulsion and acceleration. So both the forelimbs and the hind limbs are involved, and then landing forces. And especially they're super important whenever the dog is taking a turn. So imagine for a dog to change direction, they have to push that foot, that paw to the ground and really like push their body outwards to the side. And the digits are really the first structure that contacts with the ground. And that's why I believe it's such an important region, such an important structure, because really it all starts with the toes. They are the first thing to touch the ground, and it can affect the entire body afterwards. So I believe that the most, I think, important thing every one of you should understand here is that the toes have so many structures, and all toe injuries really are not the same. And from the rehab side, this matters because, yeah, the structures that are involved, it changes the whole conversation. So is there like a nail issue? Is it a pad injury, a sprain, or in other words, like a ligament injury that causes instability, or perhaps it's a tendon damage? So all of these things are not the same thing. So they may all be called like a toe problem, but they really do not behave the same way. So
now, when they're on course, what do you think? I wonder, where is it on course that you think they're playing the largest role? Or is it all the obstacles and the turns and the lands? But do you see from a moment, from a movement and a performance level, is there a certain area on course that it really is the hardest on them as far as the digits are concerned?
Yeah, actually, if you take a look at your own hand, you see, and if you try to use your digits, and if you try to like hold your other hand, it would be very easy to just like grab something. That's fairly easy, just to grip onto something. You have a lot of supportive active structures that can provide the force. So the tendons are involved, the muscles are involved in all that gripping. So that's pretty like a natural role of the foot. But what happens when you apply a force from the side or a rotation? So if you try to, just try to hold your hand, and if you try to side bend your finger, it doesn't feel very pleasant, does it? And you don't have much of the structures to actually support that. So thinking from a biomechanical perspective, everything that requires the digit to go sideways or to turn, to grip, to kind of like manage this force in combination of a direction and balance, it's extremely difficult. So if you take a look at an agility athlete, definitely they're not running straight. I mean, there are some parts of the course where they're running straight, but mostly what they're doing, they're constantly adjusting their stride, they're turning, they're changing directions. Then you have to also take into consideration surface interaction. This is such an important part, and not just the flooring, whether it's a turf, is a grass, is it dirt, but how about the surface interaction between the flooring and the contact obstacle? So everything is important, not to mentioning the weaves. And well, basically, I would say everything. But if I have to pull out one thing, I would say turning, really that fast and tight turning, that's probably the most difficult force on the digits, because it applies like a side bend or a torsion. And this is where the active structures cannot help. And everything basically relies on the passive structures, what we call. So this would be the ligaments and the joint capsule. And well, you can only do so much to strengthen this. So yeah, definitely it's a big topic. It's a big topic. And now that we are within the surfaces, Sherman, what do you think? How much does the surface influence how the toes are loaded?
Why would we go down to talk about surfaces? Talk about politics as well. Okay, let's talk about surfaces. And let's translate this back to human sports. Okay. If we look at in the United States and abroad, if they're playing on grass versus dirt versus turf, depending on what sport you're talking about, artificial turf versus grass. With grass, it's one of those things where the coefficient of friction, we call it, when things can actually grip and engage, that could be the surface of your car tire to the grip, or it could be the pad to hitting the grass or the artificial turf. Hugely different. And if you look at our athletes on the human side, they change their cleats, they change the inserts or their insoles, they can change their grip. We can't change their pads, we can't change their nails, right? But actually, our human athletes look at the surface that they're performing on and can actually change their feet. If we think of it that way, where we cannot do that. So when we talk about artificial turf, for instance, here in the United States, depending on where they're practicing or training or trialing, California, a lot of it's dirt outdoor, it's beautiful weather. If you're looking at the Northeast where it gets cold and wet and damp and they have a lot of indoor arenas, the different types of turfs, well, there's a point where you want grip, but there can be too much grip. Okay. And then you could end up doing things where you actually burn the pads. You could do things where they're gripping, and you talk about turns at speed, and we have those little ligaments, collateral ligaments, the joint capsule. All of a sudden, the body is gripped. It's like it just landed and locked in. But biomechanically, we still have to turn, but we're locked in surface. That's where you start to get those little micro strains or micro tears that can occur. And so we want a certain amount of grip, but not too much. Now, if we're in dirt, this is a place where our nails really kick in. If we're on grass or in dirt, we want to be able to dig in. Okay. So we want that because we don't have that coefficient of friction that we do on an artificial turf. So it is such a fine balance. And that means that we have to look at our dogs structurally, look at their nails, look at their nail wear, look at their pads, and consider all those things based on where you're training, where you're practicing, where you're trialing, because we can't change their cleats, if that makes sense, like they can in human sports.
So once we understand really how active the toes are, I think it really becomes so much easier to understand why they can become a problem. So Sherman, what digit problems do you commonly see in agility and sport dogs?
Yeah, it really varies. But if we talk about agility in general, the first thing is definitely will cause sprains. So think of like spraining your ankle. You have your collateral ligaments to your ankle. You would rotate that. Well, like we talked about with the anatomy images, each one of these little digits has a collateral ligament. So if they are turning left at speed, if they're turning right at speed, they're going to be basically putting stress on their collateral ligaments. Okay. So, and that's with each digit. And that's also at each one of these little joint spaces. So there is a lot of loads. So without a doubt, the most common thing I see are going to be sprains of these digits, whether it be medial or lateral collateral, we call it, meaning the ligaments on the inside or the outside. The next thing I may see is tendons. So we call that tendonitis or tendinopathies. We'll see strains with those. Many times it can be the flexor tendons, the deep digital or superficial, and we'll talk about those later. Not as necessarily as much with the extensor tendons, but I'd say without a doubt, sprains to the digits is the most common that I see.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree. But from the rehab side, I think what often matters is not only the name of the problem, but deeper down, whether that toe is painful, whether that toe is stable, is it functional, is it actually able to tolerate sport? And I think one of the most confusing topics for trainers is the difference between something that looks dramatic and something that actually affects function. So I really wanted to touch upon flat toes versus sprained toes. So perhaps just a little bit of an overview again for our listeners. What is the difference? Because many handlers panic when they see flat toes just because they look dramatic. So how do you think we should think about that?
Yeah. So first thing that's important is that if you see a flat toe, that does not mean the dog's in pain. If you see a flat toe, that does not mean the dog cannot compete. If you see a flat toe, that does not mean that the dog is, broken something, if that makes sense. What happens with a flat toe is it's more of a cosmetic issue. A beautiful picture you can see here with the center digit. Again, the weight-bearing digits are going to be the two center digits. And so when you see a flat toe, we didn't break a joint or break a toe. We didn't tear a ligament or a tendon. What we did is we actually stretched those soft tissue structures out. And we talked about how involved that digit is. And you have all the soft tissue structures that live underneath of it. And what happens with repetitive activity and loading, you can start to cause some wear and tear and some stretching to those soft tissues. So that's why it actually looks flattened, is simply because the soft tissues there have stretched over time from repetitive load or activity. It has not torn, it's not broken, it's not painful, and it is still functional. It just unfortunately looks cosmetic. So a lot of people freak out, the owners, handlers, trainers. People always like to comment on other people's dogs, that's for sure. Oh my Lord, look at your dog's toe. The toe's okay. It's a flat toe, and really from a standpoint of function with sport, will not pose a problem.
Yeah, I would just still like to add and reflect back that the entire body is a chain. So whether it might not really affect the actual performance, although, yeah, we know that in flat toes, like whether the superficial or the deep digital flexor tendons are damaged, it still has a function of gripping. But however, all other digits can definitely support the role. And mostly we don't see as much problems in the short term, and oftentimes also not in the long term. But we still have to know that the other structures are taking on the load. So the load doesn't get just like, it's not disappearing, it just gets redistributed. So in a case of a flat toe, let's say, it might not be a painful situation or a bad thing in a moment, but in the long term, sometimes the neighbor digits, so the toe to the left or to the right, and also like perhaps the wrist above, can get under a little bit more load because of that, and maybe present some challenges later in life. But that would happen regardless of participation in sport or not. So yeah, I think we can definitely relate to that flat toes are definitely not always a performance problem. And what I find interesting is that oftentimes when I'm checking dogs, it's an accidental finding. I'm like, observing that foot and investigating the digits, and they're like, oh yeah, you also have a flat toe. And they were like, what do I have? I said, yeah, you have a flat toe. And they're like, oh, I never saw that coming. Yeah, because mostly that's how it happens, unless it's an acute like tear that happens, and it's also connected to inflammation and really like pain in a moment. Many trainers don't even notice this happening. So yeah, that I believe it's interesting with the flat toes. But Sherman, how do we actually separate what looks scary from what actually affects the function?
And what you brought up was so important about the fact that some owners say, I didn't even notice that. I didn't even notice that. And that's why I have this term called body mapping. And that's why I think it is so important. First off, if we talk about toes, lots of dogs just don't like their feet messed with. They don't want their toes palpated or manipulated or stretched or checked, right? So I think that's why it's so important early on. When you first get your dog, get them used to working with their feet, because you may start to feel a digit and all of a sudden they're pulling back and you're like, oh, is it sensitive, or is he just being himself because he doesn't like having his feet or his digits messed with or manipulated? So what I think is important is for everyone listening to this is to go home today and get your dog and just start feeling what seems normal to you. Okay. Put that little digit through range of motion. Each one of those is a joint. Feel the inside, feel the outside, wiggle it up, wiggle it down. Okay. Get it mapped out. Start to feel what's normal. Okay. For each one of these locations, all the way up to the wrist area on both sides. And we're talking about the front. Remember, there's rear toes as well. Okay, so they're just as important when it comes to acceleration and things as the the forelimb. So I want you to map those out. Now, after you train or trial, compete, I want you then to come at the end of the day and I want you to feel them again, compared to what you felt normally. And all of a sudden you're like, whoa, this one feels a little hot, warm, sensitive, a little swollen. Map that, record that, stay on top of that, mention it to your rehab therapist or people you're working with, but just identify it. Body mapping, what's normal. If you see some swelling, maybe you get a picture of that, get a video of what you're seeing to allow you to track that, so we have data over time. So where I become concerned is if all of a sudden, it's been normal, oh my Lord, but now we get to this one and there's some sensitivity. Oh, there's some swelling, and that's repeatable. It keeps coming back again. Okay, we've noted that, we've identified that. let's be proactive. Let's maybe have that looked at. Okay. So before it starts going down into a higher strain. Or sprain. So I think mapping the normal is so important in all the digits, forelimb and in the hind limb, just so we know the normal, so that if you start getting to an area of sensitivity, you say, okay, I've noticed before that this is not that swollen, or this is not, restricted in range of motion. Now all of a sudden I'm starting to see some of that. That was so important because you knew what was normal for your dog. So body mapping, I think, is critical.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to go back to the flat toes maybe and sprains. And we just discussed that flat toes are more like mostly cosmetics and not that dangerous. How about sprains? Because you don't see them coming and it doesn't look dramatic. And if it's not like acute and inflamed, it looks like nothing. But would you like to explain why?
Oh boy. There are so many nerve endings. Think about a joint. We have nerve endings and joint capsule and ligaments and fluid and soft tissue surrounding it. And for any of those out there listening to this that have ever just rolled your ankle and sprained your ankle, think of how uncomfortable that is. And maybe think about the fact you had some swelling, or maybe you just jammed your own digit, playing ball or playing around. The dogs can jam their digits as well in these obstacles. And so it is something that's so important. And if you feel an area and you're placing that digit through range of motion and you feel some sensitivity, that can be an early sprain, as you were just describing. That is so important, because that says, yeah, there is a small injury that occurred there. It might just be some very small little microfibers that became stretched or inflamed, but it's something that's very important. And this is why when we are palpating it as clinicians, we'll feel for, is there any extra, the term's called laxity or looseness within that area, to say, wow, this is a higher grade sprain than we may have thought had been, noted. And so it's really important that if you get an area of sensitivity within those digits, that can be an evidence of a sprain to that location. And it doesn't take a lot. The problem with these dogs is they're so high drive. They're not going to tell you. You're not going to see lameness. Okay, so you are not going to see, with these low grade sprains, you're not going to see lameness, because they're doing everything 11 out of 10. Okay, maybe 13 out of 10. So they're not going to show you, oh, I sprained my first digit. They're not going to tell you that. They're still going to compete. But because you've done body mapping and you're checking them at the end of the day, or at the end of training or traveling, or even just at the end of your hike, you're like, whoa, this area is sensitive. That was never sensitive before. So that would be an early indicator that something may be going on. So yeah, these sprains, the challenge with the lower grade ones, or even high grade, and these high drive dogs, is they just don't show it. They don't show it. So that's why it's so important to stay on top of this.
Which reminded me of that image we have about the grades. So I think it's brilliant, because it, for everyone that is watching us, can give a visual example about the grades. I mean, it's not important how we say and diagnose the grade, but just to have that general impression what is happening with the tissues when we are grading it. So how do you think about it?
Yeah. So for those that are listening but not able to watch, what I have here is 4 images, and these are soft tissues. In particular, here we're showing a tendon, but this can be very similar if we're talking about a tendon or a ligament. And within those structures, you have these fibers. Okay. And think of it like a rubber band or some sort of like TheraBand, where there's a little bit of just give to it. Okay. In these tendons, there should be some degree of elasticity to it. And what can happen is, if you sprain it or strain it, we would call it like a grade 1. That would be us just gently, rolling our ankle. If it was you and I stepping off a curb, they can have a grade 1 strain or sprain out their own course, just gripping, turning. Maybe there was too much grip, the toes dug in, they turned, and mechanically we created a grade 1 sprain. That's something where there would be some sensitivity there. You might feel a little bit of swelling, but it definitely would be something that's sensitive. There would not be any what we call instability, meaning excessive motion in that location. A grade 2, this is something a little bit more common. This is, we were gripping, we turned, and we actually caused a little bit of micro tears. Now, it's not unstable. It's a little bit more sensitive. You may, in this one, notice some swelling. Again, for your performance dog, your canine athlete, they're just going to continue to work right through this. Okay. They're not going to show you anything. That's why it's relying on us with body mapping to manipulate, palpate, and feel for any sensitivity, any heat, any signs of swelling. And then we have what's called a catastrophic. These are our grade 3s. Okay, this is where, and this is not as common by far. Grade 2s are the most common, but the grade 3s are where the tissues have torn. Okay, it's East Coast, West Coast. And this is something where we would see a lameness. We would feel some what we call laxity or motion at that joint space. It would be more swollen, more swelling there, and also, more painful. But classically, it's the grade 2s, and those are the ones that plague us as human athletics or human athletes, as well as our canine athletes, because they don't show you when there's grade 1s. They really don't show you grade 2, but this is more micro tears, and they try to heal and they get more micro tears. And those are the ones that then aren't allowing us to function to the degree that we should be when we're doing sports.
And why do you believe that these injuries often stay undiagnosed?
Yeah. The challenge is that these dogs are so high drive, and you may notice something, and this gets back to the challenges of our profession in general, but your dog, you trust your gut. If all of a sudden you're like, you know what, my dog is slowing down in turns, my dog's taking a wider turn, my dog seems to be off in weaves. Remember, those digits have to grip through all these turns, obstacles. So you may see something in the field, or in the ring, but you don't see a lameness. So now you go into your veterinary professional's office and they're going to watch your dog walk and trot and maybe do some lunges and look completely sound, but they're not seeing what's happening in the field. This is why videos are so important as well. Video your dog out there, because you may see, whoa, we are taking a much wider turn. Our lines have changed because of that one simple little digit issue that we're dealing with. So it's so important that you collect data, meaning those videos, but you also do the body mapping. But these dogs are so high drive, they're not showing you. They're not showing you. They sure aren't ever going to show you a grade 1, probably not going to show you a grade 2, but when they are cumulative and they keep spraining it, finally you're like, something's up, something's up. And you start feeling, you're like, whoa, this one digit, the outside digit, it seems to be the most common, at least in the JAMA publication from 2018. It was the largest, publication out there that looked at digit injuries in dogs. They found that outside digit was the most common digit. And it makes sense when you're turning at speed. Okay, this guy's being drugged this direction mechanically due to gravity and the way the dog's anchoring. If we're turning in this direction, same thing. But remember, when we're going to the right, yes, we were gripping with this digit, the outside digit, number 5, but that means on this one, it's going the opposite direction as well. It's still having to grip. That's why we have the inside ligaments and the outside ligaments. They're engaging if we're turning left or turning right. So important that you're identifying these, because your dog can't talk to you. Your dog's not going to come out of the ring and say, that one turn, this digit just would not grip. Sorry, I went offline with this one. But no, they're not going to tell you that. They're not going to tell you that. So it's up to us, as owners, as handlers, to be on top of their body, because they're so high drive. They're not showing you when these things are happening.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't want people to finish this episode afraid of every toe. That's certainly not the goal. But I think the goal is really the better observation and also better decisions.
So I have a question for you. So what can handlers do in everyday life to support digital health or digit health? We know how important they are. We know the anatomy. We know what their jobs are now. We've done a deeper dive under the hood. What is it from your take that we can say? Because the whole purpose of this podcast series is early identification, prevention of injury. So let's get back to that, because I think you're right. We probably scared people with flat toes and biomechanics, loading and sprains and strains. Let's talk about how do we, what are we going to do from a standpoint of prevention? Because there's not a whole lot of soft tissues around these little digits to begin with, so it's hard to protect them. And then we got to think about nails and surface and grip and coefficient of friction, all these things. What can they do? Let's give them.
I mean, unfortunately, like you said, there are not a lot of tissues that we could actually actively strengthen. I mean, we have like the tendons that we also can influence the proprioception, so the body's sense how the foot is positioned, which digit takes more weight bearing, let's say. Then we know that the ligaments can be strengthened, but still not in such an extent, like for example in a shoulder joint. But that does not mean that we have absolutely zero control over prevention. So definitely we mentioned nails. The nail length is extremely important. I would say too long nails, but also too short nails, they both are the extremes. So we want to keep our dog's nails at an appropriate length, and also be aware of the surfaces where our dogs are training, where our dogs are running. That's something you have control over. So if you're training outside on a natural grass or in the dirt, inspect the terrain that your dog will be training on. Like, are there holes? Are there stones in there? If they are, can you clean it up? Are there holes in the field? So these are all things that can actually affect how the digits will grip, how the foot will work biomechanically, and also affect the entire forelimb chain and in the end, entire body. And that's something you have control over. Then you have control over the warm-ups and cool-downs. That's something that we were going to discuss a little bit more in the next episode, because I believe that the toes are so big and we only touch the surface. So episode number 2 is coming with a deeper dive into the injuries, diagnostics, treatment, and also prevention. So keep us in mind. Stay tuned. And then also, when is the body most affected, like most predisposed to getting injured because they become sloppy? It's definitely the fatigue. So we have to make sure that we are respecting our dog's fatigue, because when they get tired, they're becoming sloppier. The proprioception is not working, meaning that the body cannot sense anymore how much force do they have to apply, what is the position of the joints. They're not even strong enough because the muscles get tired to actually hold these forces. So fatigue is also something that you have control over, and stop the activity when you see that your dog gets tired. Then inspection, not just for potential swelling and warmth and sensitivity, but also, like, you can check the toes, you can check the nails. Are they correct? How are the toe pads? Because oftentimes you have a severe lameness, like the whole foot is like almost broken, and you have a tiny little cut in the paw pad. So it could all come down to the inspection. And then how do you know whether this is normal or not? Well, you touch it often enough so that when something feels off, you will know, oh, this was not always like that. And then the good thing is that your dog has plenty more toes that you can compare them to. So always compare left and right, toe to toe. And yeah, track any patterns if the signs are repeating. Take photos, take videos. And well, another thing with inspection that I would still like to point out, it's very good that you touch your dog's toes, but really do not like aggressively manipulate any unstable toes. So take it with caution. If you notice any sensitivity, get your dog checked out with a professional.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if we really want to be specific as well, we get back to nails. What sport does your dog do? You know, if your dog's doing sheep herding and they're out in the grass, yeah, they will be using their nails a little bit more than other sports. If they're going dock diving and they're on the surface that's not engaging the nails. So just also take into consideration the dog's sport as well. But back to the pads, oh my Lord, now practicing in California as well, they have these foxtails that get up inside the fur, and just, you know, not just look at the pads. I've learned now to look at the entire foot much closer because there are things that can get down in the fur and in between the pads that we don't even, that can make them come up completely lame. And so we're looking at the shoulder and the elbow, and the digits feel fine. Oh my Lord, look way up in there. You know, make sure that we look up inside to see if there's any foreign bodies or material that could be up there as well.
Yeah, and definitely there are surfaces and exercises that can also help through some conditioning with the strength of the toes, with stability of the toes. So that's something that we will cover in our episode number 2. So if we bring all of this together, I think the big message would be toes may be small, but they're not minor. So we know they help our dogs grip and break and turn and adapt to the surface. And not every toe problem is the same. So a flat toe, then we have a sprain, a nail injury, pad injury, an unstable joint. All of that can mean a very different thing for your dog. And that is why appearance alone does not tell us enough. So really what matters, pain, stability, function, and whether that toe can tolerate the demands of the sport. And yeah, because these subtle signs can show up way before any lameness, really, I believe that better observation helps handlers to make better decisions themselves. Like, not by panicking over every toe, but by noticing patterns, asking better questions, and also getting help when something keeps repeating. So Sherman, my final question to you would be, if listeners remember just one thing from this episode, what would you want it to be?
Oh, it would be map your dog's body, map the toes. I know that sounds crazy, but know what's normal for your dog. Okay. You're not going to know what's abnormal for your dog until you know what's normal for your dog. So sit down, enjoy your dog. It's a great way of bonding, and just start manipulating, palpating, feeling what's normal. Like you said so beautifully, compare. They have a left and a right. Compare both. Okay. Don't forget they have their rear legs as well. Feel those toes, and just start learning what's normal. And then when you get done training, trialing, competing, having fun outside, feel them again. See if there's ever a difference between what you feel just kind of sitting there, hanging out and bonding with your canine athlete, compared to what you see after they've done their sport. So I love the idea of feeling what's normal so that we can identify early if something starts to become abnormal.
Excellent. I believe this was the practical first layer. And in the next episode, we are going deeper. So we are going to talk about the diagnostics, what a good digit exam should include, why some injuries are so hard to find. We will touch upon treatment options, rehab progression, and also how to think about the return to sport if, for example, an injury happens. So again, I would like to invite everyone who is listening to us, if you have questions about the digit injuries, flat toes, sprains, nail issues, return to sports, whatever, anything you wish someone would explain in more depth, then go to our YouTube channel, Inside the Canine Athlete, and leave your question in the comments. And really, this podcast is being built around the questions that trainers and dog professionals are asking. So let us know, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss it out.
Look forward to seeing everyone in the next episode. Thank you so much for tuning in.